And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea and along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy, and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus, and as the wind did not allow us to go farther, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmone. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there, on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there.
I thought you did awesome.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Terry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Storm and shipwreck. When the south wind blew softly, supposing that they had obtained their desire, putting out to sea they sailed close by Crete. But not long after, a tempestuous headwind arose called Euroclydon. So when the ship was caught and could not head into the wind, we let her drive. And running under the shelter of an island called Clauda, we secured the skiff with difficulty. When they had taken it on board, they used cables to undergird the ship, and fearing lest they should run aground on the Syrtis sands, they struck sail and so were driven. And because we were exceedingly tempest-tossed, the next day they lightened the ship. On the third day we threw the ship's tackle overboard with our own hands. Now when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up. But after long abstinence from food, then Paul stood in the midst of them and said, Men, you should have listened to me, and not have sailed from Crete, and incurred this disaster and loss. And now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For there stood by me this night an angel of the God to whom I belong, and whom I serve, saying, Do not be afraid, Paul, you must be brought before Caesar, and indeed God has granted you all those who sail with you. Therefore take heart, men, for I believe God that it will be just as it was told me. However, we must run aground on a certain island.
All right, thank you. So just as a quick intro to this before we go verse by verse, these last two chapters that we've gotten to are going to be covering Paul's journey and his arrival in Rome. And so Luke is kind of showing here at the end of this story how, as he's gone, like we talked about the outline, right? We talked about the outline of Acts, so the story in Jerusalem, and then how the gospel spread to Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth, really, because he was showing Paul's missionary journeys through miles and miles away around the Mediterranean. And so now he's concluding with the gospel actually going into the heart of Rome. So it's very significant. It's all building into this climax of the good news of Jesus being taken into a very dark place. And then in this passage that we have here today, this verses 1 through 26 of chapter 27, what's so neat about this story is it's something that we've already seen from Luke, the author of Acts, and that he's a really good historian, and he has accurate writings and depictions of events, and very knowledgeable about these things, and the way that he communicates them indicates that, well, it further kind of proves that they're true, just because of how accurate and realistic the things he's talking about are, and the different ways that these events transpire. And so Dennis Gardner here actually says that really well, and he says about that historical accuracy, the account of the voyage is so true to ancient seagoing practices that James Smith, the Scottish yachtsman and classical scholar from the last century, spent years in the study of this narrative, including personal experience at the sites mentioned in the text. His conclusion was that this report was written by someone who had actually observed the techniques used in the voyage on a Roman vessel during a real journey on the Mediterranean Sea. So it's kind of cool, just as a point of verifiability, that this is a real thing that happened. You know, this isn't a story, just some fantasy story that we're reading, but these are real historical events. So we go into this with that mindset. Paul sails for Rome. So he's going to Rome for what reason? Let's refresh our memory.
To appeal to Caesar.
Stand trial before Caesar, right? Exactly. So this is his what his whole trial thus far has been is all leading to. So when it was decided, verse 1, when it was decided that we would set sail for Italy, Paul and some other prisoners were handed over to a centurion named Julius, who belonged to the imperial regiment. So we see this language, we, which obviously insinuates what?
He's not alone.
He's not alone, and who's involved directly in this event?
Probably Luke was writing it.
Yeah, Luke. So we can confidently say, just because of the way that this is written, that Luke himself is actually on the
Luke
ship.
and the Argonauts, right?
Right, yeah, exactly.
No.
Yeah, something like that. So Luke is on the ship as all these things are happening, and so that's part of the reason he's able to give such an accurate description of what's going on. And he and we'll see that another person and maybe some other folks are actually able to board the ship, which might sound to us kind of peculiar, because this is just like a transport for Paul, right, to actually get to Caesar. So why has he got his little clan of friends going along with him? So I mean, they would have been able to potentially just buy their own way to go, because this wasn't necessarily like we think of police escort or something like that, but they were using privately owned commercial ships to do the Roman Empire's work. And so they had just hired this private vessel out, and so they're actually able to, most likely the case is that they just purchased their own way to go along with Paul. So we meet this person named Julius, who we only see here in this chapter of Acts and nowhere else in the New Testament. So we boarded, verse 2, we boarded a ship from Adramyttium, about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia, and we put out to sea. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us. So we'll talk about the map here in a second as we get going on this. So the ship that they would have gotten is most likely just a coasting vessel that was used for commercial purposes. Like we said, it was a privately owned ship. And so what that means is that these ships would just kind of cruise along the coastline of the Mediterranean and either participate in trade, or in this case, being hired out by the Roman Empire for transporting somebody, something like that. And then we see Aristarchus, who this person we have already met in Acts 19, verse 29, and Acts 20, verse 4, and we know from other passages such as Colossians 4, verse 10 and 14, and Philemon 24, that this man, is actually a very close companion of Paul. And so that's that gives us some indication why he would want to be on this journey with Paul, since they're so close, and he wants to actually be there to support him in this very trying time. All right, let's get to the map here. So we got the first movement. So we boarded a ship from Adramyttium. Do you guys have? Well, I should probably look at this. I don't think you do, actually.
Sit down for a meeting.
No, you don't. Okay, so. This might be too close, and you might not be able to see it at all. And if that's the case, then I'm probably going to move myself and put that in the middle. But Adramyttium is right here.
You can adjust it on the side.
Right? Yep. So, it's not very helpful. Normally on a map like this, the darker part would probably be the land, but now it's the sea. So this is all the sea, and you have the land here.
Between Asia and
This is just the same map that you guys have.
Okay.
And I just marked right here, just south of Troas. It's actually Adramyttium is a little bit higher. I kind of messed up. It's kind of tucked into that pocket up there in northwest of Asia. Right up there. So that's just a point of reference for where the ship was actually traveling from in the first place. Is that okay? Do you guys want me to move this?
It's all right.
Okay. Leave it there for now, but if you have complaints, we can move it again. We'll see. We put out to sea, about to sail for ports along the coast of the province of Asia. We put out to sea. Aristarchus, Macedonian, Thessalonica was with us. So verse 3, the next day we landed at Sidon, and Julius, in kindness to Paul, allowed him to go to his friends so they might provide for his needs. Let's look at the map again. I gotta cross-reference my map that's already filled out. Alright, so Sidon is right here, and so what he's doing is he's gone up here, and now he's going across. So you can see here, just north of Jerusalem, he's already gone to Caesarea, and now they're traveling up along the coast to Sidon. And so we see Julius express a little bit of kindness to Paul in that he actually allows his friends to provide for his needs. So, well, what do you guys think that would be, providing for his needs?
His food and his water, painted clothes. And
Yeah.
everything like that.
Yep, exactly. Just some basic supplies. And, you know, we talked about before how prisons in the ancient Near East and the Roman Empire weren't quite like the prisons that we have today, you know, well, especially with no TV. But they're pretty tough. A lot of places didn't have enough even, they couldn't even stand, prisoners couldn't even stand in them, and they didn't have height to be able to do that, and they weren't really provided meals and water like prisons today would provide. Instead, that was actually something that was expected to be provided by the prisoners' friends and family, whoever wanted to bring that to them. So that was the expectation. And so here we see that maybe in like manner that Julius allows for his friends to actually care for him in this way. Maybe that's because Paul's a Roman citizen, so he's trying to honor that, or maybe, as Luke kind of alludes to here, that he's doing this out of some sort of generosity of his own part.
Hey Ross, so I'm seeing where you marked whatever the A is again, I can't pronounce it.
Adramyttium, yeah.
And it says, we boarded a ship from Adramyttium about to sail to port. but then at the bottom, I saw you put arrows up, so can you just visually, so I can see, did they go along that coastline and then they went back up, or?
So the ship from Adramyttium had come along the coastline,
Oh, okay.
all the way down here. So it was just saying that's where the ship was actually coming from.
Okay,
And so they had made port, and they were actually heading back that way.
Okay.
And so the Romans just said what they would do is sometimes hire these private vessels to say, hey, we'll give you this money, take our prisoner along the way, and they would.
okay, my bad, I misread it, because he was saying where the ship was originally from.
Yeah.
Okay, that's not where they got on.
No,
All right, my bad.
Yeah, they were down here in Jerusalem, they moved up to Caesarea under trial, then they got on the boat up to Sidon,
Okay,
up
thank you.
further along the coast there. I'll just leave that on. It's helpful. So verse 4, moving on. From there, we put out to sea again and passed to the lee of Cyprus because the winds were against us. All right, we got any sailors in the house? Anybody who's done some sailing before? What's because I didn't know this.
Would that be the leeward side or the windward side?
The leeward side, so what is that? Can somebody explain that to
East
me?
side, usually.
Yeah.
I feel like if it begins with the letter L, it should be the left side, but that's just me.
Well, so to the lee of Cyprus. So where would that be?
Beside the wind was not blowing against.
They're
Right.
selling under shelter.
Yeah. I think you all are kind of chipping in to that. You're smarter than I am because you knew that. So, but I didn't know.
It's in our book.
I had to read. Oh, cheater.
Well, I gave everybody a chance first.
It's covering the commentary, so I think it means. Yeah, you're right. So it's staying along the coast of a place to avoid winds. Right, so that's what they're trying to do. Avoid crosswinds specifically, winds that are coming against it that would actually work to inhibit the progress that they're trying to make sailing. So that's what we're talking about, the lee of Cyprus. So in this season, which is, we'll talk about this in a minute, but it's in sort of the season now. It's in middle to late September or early October that all of this is transpiring. The winds in this particular area would be blowing westward, and so they're trying to do their best to stay out of it as much as possible. So with it blowing westward, what they did was travel up along this northern part to the north of Cyprus, because if they went down here, maybe they would potentially be fighting the winds, maybe. So this is something that was pretty common for the sailors to use. They went to the lee of Cyprus, which I already indicated, but it is actually this way. And then I won't finish out because we haven't gotten to that part yet. Something like that. Because the winds were against us. Verse 5, when we had sailed across the open sea off the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra and Lycia. So that is... Oh, sweet. You guys don't have like any markings on your map. That's good.
Who gave out these
That's
maps?
kind of what I wanted. No, it's all intentional. Myra.
I'm gonna show them all this on the map. She'll get tickled if it's Julia's.
I'm sure they followed this exact
Or on the
trail.
same
Yeah, right.
section.
And then we landed at Myra and Lycia. Normally, it is a 2-week trip to get here, so that's the kind of the time that we're working with. So it was a decent amount of time. It's a few sentences just for reading, but 2 weeks transpired there for them to get to their destination.
It's probably a day trip now.
There this is verse 6, there the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy and put us on board. So Alexandria is from where? This is a city where?
Northern Egypt.
Yeah, yeah, great. So that is right around this spot here.
Try here.
This is another. It's a pretty similar situation with the ship that was coming from Adramyttium, where the boat coming from
Aha, there's.
Alexandria, just because of the way that the trade worked in the ancient Near East in this world, it was Myra was a popular port for them for the ships that were traveling from Alexandria who were actually heading for Italy up there to the Roman Empire, to the heart of Rome. They would stop there pretty often times. So that's why they found this ship that was docked in Myra. And so they carried on the trip because the other ship was actually going back to Adramyttium, so they weren't going along the coast anymore. They actually needed to head further west since that was their destination. So they took this boat that was heading there already, and they went along with them, along with all their supplies and everything like that, with all the grain and the stuff that they were going to go and trade. Paul and all of his companions were put on this ship. So we made So we made slow headway for many days and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus, which is not how I thought that was pronounced, but apparently it is, according to Max. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite Salmone. All right, so now doing a little bit more traveling, and they make it over here, and one of these areas, one of these little islands.
Go lower.
Oops.
Creek's
Oh,
below
yeah,
there.
Cnidus first.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
So so like I said, they made slow headway for many days just because of the wind and because of the season that they're traveling in, and had difficulty arriving off Cnidus. When the wind did not allow us to hold our course, we sailed to the lee of Crete. So they weren't actually able to take the original course that they had planned on going. So now they had to go to the lee of Crete, which for them to be able to counter the winds was to go to the south of Crete, actually, to be on the south end. So they stop in Salmone, right? That's where we left off. So they swing back around, and they stop here. This is going to be so tight, I'm not going to be able to write all this. That's Salmone right there. Actually, I think it's a little bit more north than that, but it's close enough. I'm not going to be tested on any of this. Hopefully I won't either. So we sailed to the lee of Crete, opposite Salmone. So, opposite, sorry. They didn't stop there, my bad. They went around. They're going this way. Cnidus, just a small note, from Myra, Cnidus is about, it looks pretty short on the map, but it's about 130 nautical miles. So there's a lot of traveling going on here. That's easy to take for granted. We moved along the coast with difficulty and came to a place called Fair Havens near the town of Lasea. Fair Havens is right in...
It's in the little corner under the R.
Yeah,
Crete.
it's like there. Great Havens.
In your study, did they discuss potentially kind of maybe how many knots on average they traveled, or these types of ships or anything like that?
I didn't get any kind of indication about that. I think it was highly variant on
Yeah.
wind. They were able to, I think I mentioned this in a little bit, they were able to do tacking maneuvers. So they were able to adjust the sails. It just means to be able to catch the wind. So whatever, they were able to actually move things around in order to make the best of the wind situation. So they're probably cruising pretty good. And it probably also depended on a number of other things, like the weight of the ship and stuff. So I didn't see a number for that, though. Fair Havens and a town we'll call the sea. Much time had been lost, and sailing had already become dangerous because by now, it was after the feast. So Paul warned them, and then it continues. So, like I said, we've been moving pretty fast, just going through this. But this, because of the time and the season that they were traveling in, it was very difficult, as Luke's been saying. It was slow. It's hard to make headway, and it seems like morale is a little bit low. And sailing had already become dangerous. It wasn't just hard, now it was actually dangerous because it was after the feast. So anybody know, well, your translations might have it. Mine says the feast, but you guys might have a footnote.
Yom Kippur.
Day of Atonement. Yeah, right. So, side note, anybody want to explain the Day of Atonement or know what it is? This isn't necessarily a crucial part of the story,
Yom
but
Kippur.
Yom Kippur, right?
That's all I know.
Atonement's involved.
Yeah, atonement definitely is involved. It's a whole day of it. Anybody want to give us some info on that?
Not study Bible, don't tell me.
So it's just the day that was commanded in the Old Testament that the high priest would enter into the Holy of Holies and offer up a sacrifice, well, I think a few sacrifices for the sins of himself and his family. He would offer up a bull for himself and his family, and then he would offer up a sacrifice of a goat for the sins of Israel, and so that their sins would be annulled for a year. And then he would have another goat that was a scapegoat, in which he would cast the sins of Israel on, and that's the one that would be driven out into the wilderness. So the idea is that the sins were cast away from Israel. And Steve Cook, our Old Testament professor, would probably be able to do a lot better in explaining that. But essentially, that's the gist of it. And so, accompanying that, there was often, I think what they do now, Jews now, is do like a 25-hour fast. And it seems in this what Luke is telling us now, or then, was that there was a fast as well. So they were hungry and they were weak because of that. No, that's not what he's talking about. He's just talking about the time of year that all this was happening. And what's actually pretty neat is because of some of the other things that Luke has talked about, some of the people in positions of power, we can actually get a pretty good estimate of what year all this is happening. And it's most likely AD 59 that all this is going on. And in AD 59, the Day of Atonement was on October 5th. So, specifically, that's a pretty good idea of the exact time when all this is going on. And so this is peak like typhoon season. This is a bad time to be traveling in this part of the world in this age, just because of all the weather and all that. And so Luke says it's really dangerous. And so Paul warned them. Paul, knowing this, knowing the sea, and knowing that things could go very wrong, in his own opinion, he says, "Men, I can see that our voyage is going to be disastrous and bring great loss to ship and cargo, and to our own lives also." So Luke kind of makes it clear that this seems like of Paul's own volition that he's offering up this advice, just saying that things could go pretty far south here if we keep pressing on, because this is a dangerous season to be traveling and to be sailing in. Verse 11, "But the centurion, instead of listening to what Paul said, followed the advice of the pilot and of the owner of the ship. Since the harbor was unsuitable to winter in, the majority decided that we should sail on, hoping to reach Phoenix and winter there. This was a harbor in Crete, facing both southwest and northwest." So the centurion and those in charge of the boat, they said, "No, we're not going to take that advice." And so the majority agreed to go on, but they knew that they couldn't stay where they were in Fairhaven, because the way where the port was, it basically impossible for them to, like it says, to winter there because of the winds and the way that the ship would be battered. It was a bad spot to be in that particular time of year. So they knew that a better port to be in that time was a little bit further on, just on Crete as well. But Phoenix is right up around here. Put a P for Phoenix. So they were trying to go that way and just go around the coast and make it there, because they knew that they would have a lot better time spending or wintering there. But while that was their plan, well, verse 13, "When a gentle south wind began to blow, they thought they'd obtained what they wanted." So they're saying, "Hey, this wind is favorable. Let's make good use of it. Let's go on." They thought that they were in the clear. So they weighed anchor, set sail along the shore of Crete, headed for Phoenix. 14, "Before very long, a wind of hurricane force, called the northeaster." Terry, you said, I think it's...
Euroclydon.
Yeah, right. I think that's the actual Greek there, or something close to it. And it just indicates this kind of typhonic wind swept down from the island. "The ship was caught up by the storm and could not head into the wind, so we gave way to it and were driven along." So while at first it seemed like they were going to be able to make it there and that travel was actually going to be okay, they were going to make it to Phoenix, then all of a sudden this huge, gale force winds that persisted. It wasn't just a quick burst or maybe for an hour or two, but it seems that what Luke is saying here is that this was an ongoing wind of hurricane force that was coming against them, coming down off of Crete. And they gave way to it. So how and why, this might be obvious, but how and why would they have given way to this kind of powerful wind?
Prevent damage to the ship.
Yeah. How would they have done that?
If it had mass, they would have taken down the sails
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
and just left it and then just let it go.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep. Take down all the stuff that's catching the wind, that's for sure. And kind of ride it out.
So does Jesus take the wheel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much. I'm sure they were all singing that in their heads.
Paul was at least, and Luke, the prisoners were.
Mm-hmm.
We don't know about Julius and them, they might not be singing Jesus take the wheel.
Yeah. Carrie Underwood is, I don't think, that timeless, Maybe I'm wrong.
Oh, jeez.
That's a bad joke. All right. Before very long, hurricane force, so the ship was caught in storms, we gave way to it and we're driven along. So well, it's nothing we can do. Be more dangerous, leave the sails up and try to go where we need to. Just kind of let it take us where it will. 16, as we passed to the lee of a small island called Cauda, we were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. So that is a little island just off, I should probably erase those dots. It is just to the south of Crete. So while they're trying to make it to Phoenix here, where they actually ended up was somewhere around here. Oh my goodness, handwriting is atrocious. So it just blew them further and further out to sea, and they weren't able to actually make it to Phoenix. We were hardly able to make the lifeboat secure. So these vessels, they all had their, I mean, we think of like lifeboats, you would have it somewhere on the ship, somewhere that you can actually lower it into the water. Well, they would have the lifeboats trailing along behind them, kind of tied up, and it would actually be traveling along with the ship. And so with all of this wind and with all of these waves and things like that, the lifeboat, would have taken water, and it would have been in a pretty sore shape. And so they had to, instead of it just dragging them down and getting destroyed, they actually had to pull it up out of the water and get it on board. So when the men, this is verse 17, when the men had hoisted it aboard, like I said, they passed ropes under the ship itself to hold it together, fearing that they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis. They lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. So that was hoisting the lifeboat aboard was the first thing they did to try to help their situation along. The second one is to run ropes, or Terry, I think your translation said cords. Is that right? Down there? Cables, that's right, cables. So they would, the idea is that they would put these cables, these ropes under the hull of the ship, and have some sort of device that would sort of tighten it up or tauten it, or make it taut. And it was to help with all the waves that they were crashing up against and the roughness of the seas. The boat was somewhat at risk, and the hull and everything like that to being broken. And so these ropes and these cables actually helped to strengthen that and make it a little bit more secure. So that was the second thing they did to help their situation. And then the last one was that they lowered the sea anchor and let the ship be driven along. And the reason for that was, obviously when you're trying to get somewhere, you don't lower the anchor because you're not going to really go anywhere. The idea is that the anchor kind of stops your movement. Well, for them, when they were being moved along, it wasn't actually to the position that they were looking to go. So they had to lower the anchor, and while it halted their progress a lot, it did somewhat help them from going completely in the wrong direction and just be so far driven off course. So those are the three things that they did as experienced seamen to help their situation and try to prevent too much disaster from happening. And so the fear of the sailors was that they would...
the sea anchor just drags through the water.
Yeah.
Do you understand that?
What did I say?
You said you interchanged anchor and sea anchor, and
Oh, okay, yeah, right,
sea
okay.
anchor just drags through the water.
Yes, yeah, okay, you're right, absolutely. To try to at least provide some sort of
I kept
friction.
all the boat errors. Anything else, you're good. But
Good, someone's got to.
So
Yes,
the sea
yes.
anchor just kind of slows you down?
Yeah.
keeps the nose
And-
pointed
okay.
into the waves.
Okay,
So you don't get
I see
swamped.
now.
Yeah, okay, perfect. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, my dad would be so disappointed. He's a good sailor.
Mine calls the sea anchors the sails.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's got a notation on it. It says,
There-
because they were afraid they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis, they lowered the sea anchor.
Mine says the gear.
Go down there to the notation on it, says lower the sails.
Sails? Yeah, I mean,
Mine says the gear, and then the notation says the sea anchor or possibly the mainsail.
okay,
So
okay,
it's either or.
yeah. What I was reading was that it was the sea anchor. So, But whatever they did, they were just obviously trying to make sure that they didn't get driven too far off course. Let the ship. So their great fear, like I was saying, their great fear is that they would run aground on the sandbars of Syrtis. So this sounds really bad, but this shows how distraught all these sailors were, because this is something that they really feared. Syrtis is here. So this is the area that they're so afraid of running aground on. They're here, right when in the narrative that Luke's talking about, and they're deadly afraid of going on the sandbar of Syrtis. And the reason for that is just kind of a ship graveyard over there, because of the way that the coast and the
Sandbars.
right, the sandbars and the ground underneath. It just made it incredibly perilous for ships to go around that area, and if you did, odds were that you were not going to come out. At least the boat wasn't. So they were so afraid, just in their own situation up here, that they were going to get driven down there, that they did all these things to correct that, or to make sure that that didn't happen. Now, I think that's most of the specific travels that we're going to see just in our. There's some things that happen as they continue along, but I'll do a brief interjection here. Oh, it's already 7:30. Oh my gosh. All right. Well, we'll conclude with this then. We'll pick up next time. So I know this is more in our other lessons, and as we've been going through Acts, it's been a lot more practical, certainly, as we've been going through the different speeches and things like that, and we hear all these stories of these people being saved, and Luke is telling us about all these events as the gospel is spreading throughout the ancient Near East, and it's very exciting, and we meet some persecution, and we can even learn from that as we see how these apostles endure the hardship and the hatred of the world around them, as Jesus promised that they would be hated. And while all of that is wonderful, and it's so good to have that practical application, as we can actually see these great examples of faith and actually start to maybe apply some of those principles in our own lives. What's also helpful for us, more so I would say probably in our, it helps us understand these stories that we're reading more, and it helps us have a better hermeneutic. Right, if you remember that word, which is just the study of interpretation, specifically about the scriptures, about the Bible. When we understand and can actually imagine the places where all these things took place and happened. Because when we're able to do that, when we're able to actually picture and know on a map where some of these events are happening, and we read about these stories, you know, it might spark in us like, well, I know that's a Roman province at that time. So we can read things through that perspective, actually having that lens saying that all these other things are in place, like all the Roman politics are in place. We know the importance of being a Roman citizen, and maybe why some of the relationships between the Roman officials and the Jews were the way they were. And that's just an example. But when we actually understand where these events in the Bible, specifically in the New Testament, are all happening, well, the Old Testament too, it's really good to know that about the nation of Israel. But where all these things are happening, it kind of brings it to life, and then it also helps us understand it to a greater depth than we would if we're just thinking, if we have no point of reference for any of these things, no geographical idea of where all of this is happening. So while many of us, or maybe none of us, have actually been to these places themselves 2,000 years later, we can look on a map and we can see and imagine where these things are actually happening. And while it's not going to, probably not going to like negatively affect our relationship with God to not know any of that, I think it does help us to some degree, like I was saying, to actually know a little bit more about what's going on and maybe why things are going on in these books that we're reading. I mean, we've already talked about how it's been helpful in Acts as we've talked about the different contexts of the time, talked about the Romans, their area of control. We talked about the different Roman provinces, or at least in what Luke has mentioned. So it is helpful, and that's all to say that when you read something, you don't know where that place is. A lot of your Bibles have a map in the back. Flip to the map and see where it is. It could help you in the long run to be able to have that. So that's the whole purpose for why we did the map and went through all that stuff. And we'll you can keep your maps and bring them back next time because we still have to finish the story. But that's why those are our notes today. So it's not super practical. I don't have a big old lesson for you guys to go home with and start to apply to your lives. But I hope that in the future in your Bible reading, when you're reading and don't know where a place is, look it up.
But it also attests that, non-believers, atheists, they'll put the Bible on the same level as, mythology.
Right, yeah.
And this is yet another, attestation of the fact that this is a historical document.
Mm-hmm.
Real places, real people, real seasons,
Yep.
and you can even track it to that point. And so,
Yeah, absolutely. And Luke is very good about that. He's very thorough, very specific, and because of that, we're able to have a lot more evidence to actually say that these things actually took place. And even today, with some of the archaeological finds that they've had, just pointing out the accuracy of Luke's own documentation of where these things took place, the specific places, the people who were in charge, the officials, and we actually see, writings about these same people, and it's there for a reason, certainly. All right, anybody got any closing thoughts there about what we studied tonight? Incredibly interesting.
We got 2 names wrong.
What's that?
I only got 2 names wrong.
2 names. Well, this is all to say if those are indeed the way those are pronounced.
We're gonna say they are, because I only got 2 wrong.
Yeah.
That's how we pronounce it here.
Yeah.
Dave Legg will probably watch this and be like, no, that was actually supposed to be this. I'll be like, all right, fair
You
enough.
get a phone call.
Yeah, no. Mona, did you say something?
I wanted to talk to the sailor briefly. How did they get the ropes underneath? I mean, I would not volunteer to go overboard to put the ropes underneath. You can't throw them ahead because by the time you got to the end, it'd be like.
One guy drew the short straw.
yeah, you said the guy you don't like.
I was just curious. If that's the rule.
Yeah.
I was about to say, they probably got one person on either side of the front, and they tossed it down and fed them over. Or had
That makes
the
sense.
ship moved across.
That makes sense. Thank you so much. That was gonna bug me.
Kidneys.
Bringing logic into it? Get out of here.
Come on.
Nice. Logical.
I'm not jumping in that water.
If you drew the short straw, you would.
Come here, sharks. I know the truck will spit me back.
Good job on the overhead.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel like I'm a
Take Zoe with me.
teacher from the 80s or 90s.
It'd be about the same time. Yeah, but if you're still.
I'm saying-
She's gonna send her over,
Yeah.
get a shower.
It's cool, and it's still practical, it's still helpful. Because you all wouldn't have been able to see that on the TV, and we couldn't have made edits that quickly on our TV, so it's good stuff. Good piece of
I
hardware.
don't know, probably about the same.
All right, anything else there? Anybody want to close us in prayer for tonight?
I will.
Jerry, thank you, sir.
Heavenly Father, God, we thank you for another day you bless us with. We just thank you for the opportunity to be here and study your word and be with all of our brothers and sisters, Father. We just thank you so much for that. So go with us as we leave here tonight and keep us all safe until we return again. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen.